Here. Thank you, Zoom lady, for letting me know the recording is in progress. And we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today and joining us for today's webinar. My name is Angie Lindsay, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Florida, and I am one of three point of contacts for EDEN, the Extension Disaster Education Network for Florida, and the main point of contact for UF IFAS Extension. So I currently serve as the chair-elect for the EDEN Network, and I'm filling in today for the Professional Development Committee Chair, whose name is Kimberly Davis with FAMU, who is unfortunately under the weather. So I'm happy to fill in for her today and hope that she is feeling better very soon. So if you could just take a moment to, especially there in the question and answer thing, and let us know your name and institution so we know who's with us today. And I'm super excited about our presentation. Today, we're going to be hearing from Tracie Sempier, who's going to be talking about Neighbors Helping Neighbors, Community-Centered Severe Weather Preparedness and Resilience. And just a little housekeeping before we get started today. If you have any questions during this particular presentation, please put those in those question and answer box that you see there. You see already filling it out with your name and your institution. So thanks so much. But we will use that today to take questions during the presentation. Tracie said she's also okay being interrupted. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll try to make sure we have those as well. But we should have time after the presentation today to go through some of these questions that folks are going to be putting in the Q&A box there. So thank y'all very much. So I'm now going to introduce Tracie. Dr. Tracie Sempier is the Coastal Resilience Engagement Specialist for the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. She works with local communities, state and federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, port authorities, emergency and floodplain managers, residents, and K-12 audiences to try and decrease the negative impacts of coastal storms on families, communities, the environment, natural resources, and property. Tracie is also the VORTEX Southeast Outreach Coordinator, and in this role, she's creating a model for a regional extension program and synthesizing research findings from the VORTEX Southeast program to inform application in local communities. Working closely with the National Severe Storms Laboratory, NSSL, National Weather Service, NWS, and other partners, she engages with sea grant and land grant programs throughout the country and utilizes existing networks to build connections with target audiences. Tracie has over 20 years of professional experience in education outreach with various audiences in formal and informal learning environments. So I have been a fan of Tracie for many, many years, and it has been a pleasure to work with her on many projects throughout the years. So Tracie, I am going to mute myself because my computer keeps dinging. I apologize for that. And I'm going to go ahead and let you do your presentation. And again, folks, if you could put your questions in the question and answer, and we should have some time for questions afterwards. So thanks so much. Tracie, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Angie. Can everyone hear me okay? You can just give me the thumbs up, Angie, if you can hear me. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for the introduction, Angie. And, this is kind of a timely topic, seeing as how we've had severe weather just kind of, going through the country these last couple of weeks. I'm sure you've seen the headlines. And so maybe what I should start with, why do we even study severe weather? I think that's probably pretty obvious to all of you that are on the presentation today. This picture was actually taken in Chilton County. There was an event on March the 17th in 2021 that went through Chilton County, Tuscaloosa County, and Wayne County, and this is all in Alabama. And I thought that this picture really says a lot about why we study severe weather, because, you can still see where these folks were having, leading a normal life, and very quickly, because of tornadic activity, that was interrupted. This happens to be a mobile manufactured home, and that's gonna be relevant a little bit later in the presentation. So why do we study severe weather? Well, we have tornadoes that are close to home. So just to the west of me, just on May the 13th and 14th, we had an EF2 hit Sulphur, Louisiana. That was winds of about 120 miles per hour. And then we had another EF1 that hit Westlake. Again, about 100 miles per hour. And if you just Google that storm, you'll see that there's quite a few, quite a lot of damage in those particular storms. Again, these events are very personal. And just over the Memorial Day weekend, if you were watching the news, some of us had some incredible weather. Other parts of the country did not. We have folks all from Texas all the way to the Northeast that are experiencing severe weather. And so it's in the news all the time. The other kinds of things you might see in the news are headlines like these, that Tornado Alley is expanding and hitting more southern states than ever. And you may start to see people talking about a shift into the southeast for tornadic activity. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit in the presentation. But remember, too, that we're getting a lot better at tracking tornadoes, and that we didn't really have Doppler radar until about 1993, 94, at least in the Mississippi and Alabama parts of the United States. So we're also having that increased tornadic activity because we're able to track more. Our ability to do that and send drones in and find where tornadoes hit, if there were not people there, we're just better at that. So that's one of the reasons we're seeing more. But then you're also seeing headlines like on the right there, why are mobile home residents more likely to be killed by a tornado? And we do know and have good data to support that claim actually in the research. So we're receiving a lot of attention because it's in the news for severe weather. But we're also receiving a lot of attention to this topic because it has an economic impact. So I actually just chose a year that happened to be really terrible for the area where I live, which was in 2020. NOAA puts out these billion-dollar weather and climate disaster infographics, which I think are great. And I just want to show you real quickly the economic impact from just one of those tornadic events. So while we're on the coast or experiencing Zeta and Laura and Sally, which, by the way, we're still recovering from, then if you just take one of the storms that's just a little bit to the north of us, those like that purple icon with the tornado, and you blow it up, I'm going to blow up the one that is the Easter tornadoes. So if you'll kind of follow with me, it's that southernmost one. And if you look at that, this is one outbreak. Notice how far it spans, how many states it spans. Each one of those little triangles is where a tornado occurred. 140 confirmed tornadoes in that one event. And with that came a huge economic impact. We had $3 billion in damages. And what's worse is we had 32 fatalities and 257 injuries across that area. The other thing to kind of take note of in this graphic is that you'll see that I put the enhanced Fujita rating at the bottom. The vast majority of those 140 tornadoes were actually on the very low end of the Fujita scale. So they were EF0s or EF1s. And so that just tells you that even at that level, these kinds of storms can cause huge amounts of damage. So there's an economic impact, and that's another reason why we study these. We also study these because tornadoes kill people. And if you look at this, this is Stephen Strader. He's at Villanova University. And one of the things that he does is he tracks where the fatalities are occurring. And in this particular tweet that he put out, he's saying, look, we got the stats in. This was for a Beauregard, Alabama tornado. And he's saying of the 23 fatality, 19 of those people lived in mobile manufactured homes. So we know that we have specific vulnerabilities in the Southeast, especially within some of the structures that people are living in. And if you kind of blow his work up a little bit on this screen, if you just look at C, that bottom left-hand corner, those two black lines are kind of the tornado went in between those two kind of parallelish lines. Each one of those little circles that is yellow is where you had the severity of the damage, the mobile manufactured homes, and then all those little red crosses are where the fatalities occurred. So that's how he's getting his numbers. They're doing drone footage, they're having heat maps, and then they're figuring out exactly how many people perished and where they were located so that we'll have a better understanding of where we have to get people out of harm's way. And then if you look at even another tornado, so this one was in Moore, Oklahoma, And if you just look at the structure by itself, you have mobile manufactured homes being the highest cause of severe injury or death. So we have this kind of information for a lot of the tornadoes. However, if you did go back and look at the whole range of the research that has been conducted, you'll see that we actually study less than 1% of the tornadoes in the United States. I think it's a common misconception. We have a lot of information about that 1%, but there's a lot of tornadoes that go unstudied. So I guess that kind of brings us to the question of, well, we talk about vulnerabilities, who's vulnerable, who's susceptible to these kinds of storms. And so I think it's important for us to look a little bit at how we define vulnerability. And I'm sure that in your work, I know in my work, we have certain groups that we consider to be most vulnerable, but I want to kind of look at that real quickly before I move on. This is a picture from Moss Point, Mississippi. This is about 25 minutes away from where I live. And this happened in June of last year, June of 2023. And it was about a 6-mile tornado that caused this damage. And if you were go back to this particular site today, almost a year later, then really the only thing missing from this picture would be that crane in the back. They've had a really long road to being able to recover due to some delayed disaster declarations. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Like some communities, obviously smaller communities, are having difficulties. In this particular instance, just to let you know, the County Emergency Operations Center, or Emergent EMA, was really not called in to help because the tornado happened within the city limits. And that kind of threw our local municipality leadership off guard. They just assumed that they would have that help from the county. And it took a lot of different red tape to be uncovered in order to kind of be able to allow them to help. So if you were to ask a disaster scholar what, the social vulnerability meant within our regions, a lot of times you would see maps like this one that we get from like the Social Vulnerability Index. This one came from the Center for Disease Control. And I'm sure you've got lots of other tools that you can use to show these. And obviously in this one, if we look at the Southeast United States, which is where I'm from, there's a really high percentage of poverty rate. So that's one way we could define someone's social vulnerability. Their access to resources, you'll see here in the definition, is bound by, their class, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, how far away they are from resources, their housing type, any kind of disability they might have. So this is one way that scholars might define vulnerability, but there are some other reasons why we are susceptible to things in our area and across the United States. I live in an area where we have what we call compounding disasters. So hurricanes, oil spills, tornadic activity, economic downturn. And this actually puts what we call a really high allostatic load on an individual, meaning that when there's always in a recovery phase, it's very difficult on someone's physical and mental health. And they have a really hard time coming back from that because there are so many compounding disasters in a row. So here we have some issues with thinking about how we address people's mental health issues as a result of that. So I like this diagram because I feel like it gives you a good snapshot of some of the other vulnerabilities I wanted to talk about, and it's all in like one slide. So if you look at A, that particular data set there is showing you that one of the reasons we're susceptible, especially in the part of the country where I live, to tornadic activity is because over half of the tornadoes that we have in our area are nocturnal, meaning that they happen at night when people are in bed and they've silenced their cell phones. So most of the time people are not being alerted to the fact that there is a tornado. So we have a lot of fatalities due to that. Then if you go over across to B, that's a really similar graph to the CDC one I showed you earlier. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. This one is the one for mobile manufactured homes. So we have a high percentage of mobile manufactured homes in our area. That's important because we know that those structures tend to fail the most often, and we know that the percentage of casualties in mobile manufactured homes are at least 50% greater than they would be in a site-built structure. And we do have research to support that now. If you look and see at the bottom on the left, we also have a high percentage of forest cover. This is important because it's more difficult for certain types of radar to be able to penetrate that forest cover and give us accurate measurements. So I'm going to tell you about a research project that's trying to kind of get at that very thing, but that is an issue for us. That is a vulnerability where we live. And then finally, we have a high percentage of poverty by county, which we already looked at. So we kind of have this perfect storm if you look at all of these together. But then here's something that I alluded to before that you may not have thought about before. Let's move forward to a different year. This is like another one of those billion-dollar disaster infographics. And this is the year of that storm where I showed you the picture in Moss Point, Mississippi. But guess what? There's no infographic of a little tornado down in coastal Mississippi for the year of 2023 because it did not hit the billion-dollar mark. So in some regards, you might actually be more vulnerable if you fall into that area where don't have quite enough to be declared a billion-dollar disaster. You don't meet FEMA's threshold for disasters, and then your community ends up looking like this and continuing to look like this for a long period of time. This was an EF2 tornado, by the way, the same as for the picture I was showing you earlier. And we had the pleasure of getting to talk to Mayor Knight last month at a workshop we held in Moss Point. And he really did a good job of describing how, as the mayor of a town, especially a small town that doesn't have as many resources, he really had to try and navigate how do I reach out to the attorney general? How do I reach out to the governor? And what ended up happening is that they took the Moss Point tornadoes along with some other smaller communities that had been hit, and they kind of put all of those disaster damages together in order to finally get a declaration. But in between that time, they had a lot of difficulty just getting debris removed and then even starting to rebuild. So that can be considered a vulnerability too, right? If maybe you don't hit a particular threshold, maybe it's within your city limits, you didn't know your county EMA department wasn't going to immediately come in and assist you. And so these are some things for communities to think about. So a lot of these I've already hit on, but I just wanted to touch on them really quickly. We do have research that supports that the tornadoes in the Southeast United States often happen at night. So we have a couple of different studies that talk about that. We know that they negatively impact populations in the region, especially those that are vulnerable to tornado threats, meaning those folks that are living in unsafe structures. Sometimes we know that a lot of these mobile manufactured homes are not necessarily in cities and parks, but they're in rural areas on unmarked roads. And there was one study that was done in Alabama showing that the distance from the emergency management building, like for emergency services to actually get to those structures for help, to provide help, was significantly longer than it was for those folks, of course, that lived in like one of the nearby towns. We also know that people are less confident in their ability to be notified of a tornado warning during the overnight hours. So people recognize that this is an issue. And we also know that some social science research has shown us that people actually need some kind of an outside influence before they will act or to begin making a decision. So when we put out messages from the National Weather Service, then they have to be understood, but they also have to be seen as a potential threat so that people will take action. And otherwise, they'll go through what we call a milling process. So they want to immediately maybe move their families. If they'll go to some other place like the news or the radio and seek more information, maybe call a relative before they actually do anything. And so how the tornadoes are warned, the ways that we communicate that, the way that those warnings are received by the public, we know that this is really important to a lot of different people, right? Emergency managers. We know it's important to weather forecasters, broadcast meteorologists, just folks across the weather enterprise. And so because of that, that's kind of how the National Severe Storms Laboratory ended up putting together the Vortex Southeast project, which began in 2015. They started looking at more of the physical science behind the tornadic activity in the Southeast. And they've broadened this scope to be across the United States, but they've just broadened that in the last year. And they have these test labs, these test beds in Norman, Oklahoma at the Severe Storms Lab, where they can put emergency managers in front of a computer. They can run real scenarios and help them to make real-time decisions or practice making real-time decisions with those simulations. And then you see that bottom picture, they actually also have like a television studio so that broadcast meteorologists can come, and as they're seeing the information come through on their screens, they can practice like what the messages are that they're putting out to the public. So we do have a space for this. And this is where a lot of the Vortex information, like all the research, the physical and social science comes together. And again, this is in the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. So here's what I wanted to just quickly, before I kind of talk about the extension piece, I did want you to know that there's some really great research coming out of the National Severe Storms Lab. And you might be a little less familiar with it. I know that I was, as an extension specialist. I've had to learn a lot, but it's really been quite enlightening because now I can use this when I am out in the field teaching others. So on the physical science side, they have a couple of projects that you might be interested in. The first one is called FACETS, and that is just an acronym for forecasting and a continuum of environmental threats. So this one is of particular interest to me because my hometown is Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And in 2011, when the tornadoes came through, people were not prepared. And we had lots of injuries, unfortunately, lots of deaths. And there were some long track tornadoes in that particular episode. And I think what we see on television, like from our broadcast meteorologist, and what they are able to do behind the scenes, there's kind of a little bit of a gap in what happens here. So Facets is trying to kind of narrow that gap. So for instance, right now, your broadcast meteorologist, they're on screen, they're live, they're talking to you, they're looking at their monitor where they have a polygon that is stationary on their screen. And after they go live talking to you, they have to go back and physically redraw where that polygon is going. Well, when you think about it, like 15 minutes could have passed, right? Because they're trying to, report on where the tornado is going if they can. And so there's a time lag there. So with Facets, they're trying to do exactly what the word says, forecast on a continuum, where the computer will actually move the polygon for whoever is making that report, for the meteorologist. It will actually track and follow the storm in real time so that then that polygon can continue to get narrower and more precise as it moves along your television screen. That would be a huge increase to what we have now. So what we have now is an average of 14 minutes of warning time. I think some people think it's a lot longer than that for tornadoes, but it's actually on average 14 minutes. And what they're hoping to do with the Facets program is to get that to increase the amount of time that people would have to take action. And so that's going to be really exciting. My understanding is it's still about 5 to 6 years away from being operational, which means that we still don't have it yet, but we're getting closer. And then they're bringing those folks into the test bed at in Norman, Oklahoma, to kind of test it out and make sure that it's right before they do a big launch. So that's one exciting piece of research that's coming out on the physical science side. And then the other one I wanted to tell you about is the Perils program. And again, you can Google these at any point, and they've got amazing videos and stuff that you can watch. But real quick, in a nutshell, the Perils program uses a lot of different instrumentation out in the field to better understand how tornadoes form in squall lines. So if you remember, I told you that sometimes that cloud cover makes it more difficult for radar. So if they can go into an area that they know is going to receive a lot of tornadic activity, they can actually place this instrumentation down and they can get better measurements so that then they can figure out where the likelihood of those formation on the squall lines is going to happen. The other issue with where I live, at least in the Southeast, is that many of our tornadoes are rain wrapped, which means not only are they happening at night, a lot of them, but they're also hard to see because they're rain wrapped. And so part of this instrumentation helps, which is, because it's a huge challenge to try and be able to tell people, pinpoint exactly where they're going to land. So that's part of where the Perils Project comes in. And that map on the left there is just showing you some of the places that they've been trying to deploy instrumentation throughout different tornado seasons. And then in those other two pictures on the side are just showing you two different pieces of instrumentation. The top one that's on the back of the truck is a Doppler radar, but it's a specialized one that operates on a 3 centimeter wavelength. And so it helps to detect really tiny water droplets or snowflakes. And because it can do that, it can determine it can enhance the forecast of like precipitation amounts, and that helps them to determine when thunderstorms are going to form. So that's kind of a really sensitive Doppler radar. And then the one at the bottom is a lightning mapping array. They go and they stick those out in fields where they may not have as much radar located. And on those lightning arrays, they can help to get more real-time lightning data, which is used, of course, as we know, by like here, our Marine Education Center uses that because they have a lot of outdoor programming for students. I know that my son's soccer outdoor is an outdoor sport, right? And so they use that a lot for our county sports complexes. So there's some really neat physical science that's going on currently that should enhance our ability to be able to predict these and give people more lead time. So I kind of want to just kind of recap just a little bit. I want to make sure that you guys, and you've probably heard some of these things before, but a lot of what I do in my job is just try to talk to people about things that might be misconceptions. And so one of the things I know that I come across when I'm talking to folks that live in maybe a mobile manufactured home is that they feel like they're going to have enough time to get in the car and drive a long way away to a shelter. And so that's when I have to reiterate, well, you can drive maybe to a family member's house if they're right down the road, or you might be able to, drive to a shelter if it's really close to where you are. So a lot of what I do is try to get people to think about what are their options? Where can I get to in 14 minutes that is safer than where I am right now? And what does that look like? Because that's the reality. That's what we're operating under right now. And that's a much different conversation than, say, if I have 3 days to evacuate for a hurricane. And there is, because of where I live, there is some confusion about those two things. There's also some misconceptions about how messages are going to be communicated. So I've had some local weather forecasting office folks tell me that they'll get calls after a storm has passed, especially tornadoes, and they'll say, well, you didn't say it was coming down my road. Why didn't you tell me it was coming down my road? I would have sought shelter. So the public has a misconception that the broadcast meteorologist is going to have time to be able to tell them, hey, oh, now it's coming down your court or your road or your street, so you should seek shelter now, instead of kind of heeding to those broader watches and warnings that they receive from the National Weather Forecasting Office. I've already talked about that third bullet, that so many of these tornadoes are studied. Actually, it's less than 1%. And then there's also some misconceptions about the opening of shelters for tornadic activity. In a lot of our areas, it's really important for us, I think, as extension professionals to be able to know what shelters are going to open. Many of them don't have shelter managers that are trained, so they can't open. In my area, the hurricane shelters do not open necessarily for tornadoes. So it just depends upon the extremity of the event and whether or not they have people that can go and open the shelter. So sometimes we don't want to ever tell people to go to a location and then they sit in the parking lot and be in a much, a much worse situation than if they had, sheltered somewhere else. So that's another thing to kind of think about. So kind of just moving on here, this is just a graphic that kind of shows you, hey, we think we know a lot about tornadoes, but we really only know this tiny bit and this huge amount that happen. But what we do know, and this is kind of what pushes us into like the social science and extension work, is that we do know that more than 1,000 tornadoes affect communities across the U.S. every single year. And we do know that 111,000 people on average are exposed to these events, but that we know very little about how people are receiving watches and warnings, how they're interpreting those, and how they're responding to those. So one of the things that we've been working with the Severe Storms Lab on, a couple of different things. One, we've been trying to do some targeted outreach to these groups that we know are more vulnerable that we talked about earlier. And then the other is we've been working with them on this tool called Tornado Tales. And the Tornado Tales tool allows anyone who wants to be a citizen scientist to report how they receive those watches and warnings. And I'm going to show you in a minute how we use that information. So we're working with them to try and take some of the information and research that they've developed and make sure that gets in the hands of the folks at the local level, the folks that we serve, but we're also trying to help them improve this tool. Here's one like really good example that happened just recently in my area. So we had the Rolling Fork tornadoes that happened just a little over a year ago in March of 2023. And the Severe Storms Lab said, we need to get on the ground. And this same survey that we're doing on Tornado Tales, we need to be able to do some in-person survey work. So one of the cool things about that is that, so I'm on the coast, I'm working with them on this project. I was able to call Emily Carter, who's at MSU Extension, who's actually in Sharkey County, and she was actually able to help me figure out how we could get people lined up to do these interviews. And I think Emily taught at Eden last year and maybe gave her experience because she was so involved in this whole process. And so my little portion of this was just going in and doing some survey work. So we visited Rolling Fork. I think it was actually exactly 7 weeks after the storm event. And we tried to kind of get a feel for the folks that experienced the storm, how they were, did they receive a watch? Did they receive a warning? We found out the sirens did not go off. We found that the vast majority of people that were killed in that storm, actually over 70% were in mobile manufactured homes. We did this in little teams of individuals. So I went and did the public interviews. We had someone doing broadcast meteorologist interviews. We had someone doing emergency manager interviews. And so we're in the process of writing up the results of each one of those and how those different groups responded to this event. But not only did we have that survey work, but we really wanted to go back and make sure that the folks in that community were aware of the results that we found. So we were there for the anniversary event just a few months ago. And now we have a plan with the emergency management there in the county to go back and conduct some severe weather trainings. So that last picture is actually where they were operating the emergency operations center during those storms. It's a fitness gym that someone allowed them to use or convert because that was one of the only buildings standing. So in those surveys, those ones that we took, it is the exact same survey work that is in this Tornado Tale app. This is just a quick demonstration of how we sometimes will talk about Tornado Tales. We use these comic strips and we use them because the public seems to enjoy them, and they seem to respond well to these little cartoon graphics. So what we'll do is after a storm happens, we go to the local weathers, like the local stations, like the new in my area, it would just be whoever's broadcasting, in my area. And we give them the link to Tornado Tales and we ask them to talk about it online. And so that's kind of where we start. And so I'll show you what happened in one of the events where we actually analyzed the data, because I want you to see like how we use the information that we're asking the public to share. So first we tell them about it. We try to get a meteorologist online to share it broadly. We actually have these little bracelets that we hand out that have the QR code on there at outreach events too, so that people have it. And then once an event occurs, then this might be what that map looks like. It gets populated pretty quickly. So this was an event in 2022. And about 20 minutes after the broadcast meteorologist shared this on the news, there were 90 survey responses. Like it was very good for us for collecting data. And so you'll see that the green ones are where There were like maybe 2 or 3 or 5. And then the orange ones, there were more reports of the tornado from those areas. And then that little red arrow is just the track of the tornado. So there were a couple of different ones on June 8th. So just kind of keep that in mind. They kind of come in and there's a little spot that tells you, okay, here's where someone completed that survey and gave us information about what they did. Okay, so this is what we do with the information. Here's those events. You'll see the June 8th event is in the middle there. I just want you to focus on that one just for time purposes. But if you look at the June 8th event, it was in both Kansas and Missouri. So it was like a little bit of a long track tornado there. It happened mostly in the evening hours. Again, it was a nocturnal tornado. And so the kind of information we can pull then is these were 3 events. But again, if you just look at just the June 8th event, there's the polygon where the tornado happened, and all those little dots are where people completed that tornado tales survey. And in that, people were telling their stories. Here's where I went. Here is what I did. Here is how I received the warning or did not receive the warning. So we get all these reports in, and then we can like just take that again, that June 8th event. And many of the respondents that were here on this same map said that they never received a tornado warning until the tornado had passed the location. Now, that doesn't mean that the Weather Forecasting Office did not give the tornado warning. It just means that somehow they did not receive it. So they either don't have the messages, they don't have multiple ways of receiving messages, is partly what that tells us. And so this event had a lot of unwarned people, people that maybe did not seek action because they didn't know that it was close to them. Okay. Then within that, we can say, well, here's the warning reception rates. And we can say, look, for that June 8th event, a lot of people said that they did not receive the warning for, whichever, and it varies by event. And then we can relay that information back to the National Weather Service so that then they can kind of figure out, well, what happened in this instant? Where do we need to be getting out the information? The other thing that we can do is we can see where sources of the warnings, like, well, most of the people got these through automatic texts or sirens. So we can kind of see where the vast majority of people are receiving their information. And then again, we can compare events for the warning part of the response. So what did they do? Well, in this case, a lot of people took protective action, but some did not. And then we can even break it down even further and say, this is actually what they did. Most people just went to the most secure area of their house. Most people moved their family from wherever they were. So just by having these citizen science tools, it gives us a really good picture of what's happening in the events. And then we can, again, just work with the local weather forecasting office to determine, well, what needs to happen. So in this particular event, these might be the key points that we would talk to our local EMA folks about. We might say, look, we know a bunch of people didn't receive the warning. We know that the text alerts were the most common way people received warnings. We know that regardless of when they received the warning, their protective actions didn't change that much. And we know that one of the most common things people did was move their family to a more secure location. And we put a bathtub there because that's where a lot of people said that they sheltered. So again, if you're interested in this, and I know I ran through this really quickly, but if you're interested in this, you can scan this QR code, and we actually have created some story maps that tell the story of those particular events and how Tornado Tales was used. So if for some reason you are doing outreach in your community and you want to tell people about a tool, I wanted to be sure that you knew that that information really does get used and how it gets used and what kinds of things it can tell us. So once we have all this information, then the question is, well, what do we do with it? And I'll show you just a couple of examples from how our extension program has worked with the Vortex data. So we've done a lot of different things around the Vortex research, but in my particular area, we focus on nocturnal tornadoes. We also talk about seasonality because in our neck of the woods, people really think that tornadoes only happen at certain times of the year, and we know they can happen the entire year. I think they get a lot of that seasonality because of hurricane season, so they get confused. We also have a lack of shelter, so sheltering is a big part of the outreach that I do. And then we also have a lot of vulnerable structures in my area. So these are kind of the 4 things that I focus on and a lot of the outreach that I do. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about our partnership. If you're interested in this, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But we have partnered with NSSL to be able to conduct very specific targeted outreach to some of these groups. And so as a result of that, we started this as a pilot in 2020. We really started to do some different outreach events specifically to mobile manufactured homeowners in early 2021. And now we're up to the point where we've hired some new staff, and we're doing a lot of our outreach now in local libraries, especially in rural parts of Mississippi and Alabama. This is the team that I work with. So the folks at the National Severe Storms Lab are Alan Gerard, Mackenzie Krokek, Tony Liza, Justin Sharp, and Cody Berry. And then from our program, our director is LaDon Swan. Our deputy director, Steve Sempier, Christiana Allen, and I are the ones that are most of the time in the field, just to give you an idea of our project team. And our goals for Extension are really to do that weather, that neighborhood level weather preparedness that we talked about, and to make sure that we can build trust with partners so that we can go back into communities multiple times and have these conversations. And so the way that we decided to build that was through a theory of change model. And without going into a lot of detail on the model itself, the biggest ideas here are on the left-hand side. We're engaging, just like you guys engage with your constituents within your programs. We're equipping, we're doing a lot of trainings, giving people skills so they have higher self-efficacy to be able to do something for themselves during severe weather events. And then our goal is for them to eventually get to that level of empowerment where then they are teaching others within their community and kind of carrying on the different skills and the different actions of being prepared. And so this is what that looks like. This is Christiana at an event in Selma, Alabama. And she has got a Go Kit, and she's talking to people about what items go in a Go Kit. The vast majority of people did not have a Go Kit, so this was news to a lot of them. But we also talked to people about how you can get all these items at the Dollar General store. The Dollar General is just very common in our area, so we wanted to make sure it was easily accessible. And we also talked about how you don't have to purchase all the items at one time, because so we have like a calendar. Hey, in this month, get these items, prioritize these items, and this month prioritize these items to kind of help people get started with that. And then with the skill building, I like to work with the local fire department on this. We do chainsaw safety, we do first aid, we do hands-only CPR. We also talk to people about how to find sheltering locations. We get out maps and we talk about scenarios based upon where they are, where they would go. And then we try to just practice those skills. And when at all possible, I'll try to bring in a health professional if we're doing a CPR, or we'll try to bring in, like I said, someone from like the police or fire department who does a great job of helping demonstrate and helping people actually build those skills during the training. So that's little bit about what we do. Then we also try to pull in like infographics from different sources. So when we talk about sheltering, we make sure that the graphics we use are really easy to understand, and we put these out at a lot of our events. So the safe sheltering. And then this one's been really important for those folks that live in vulnerable structures, just giving them options, not saying, hey, you just can't be in that structure, but we talk about better options, and that there's a spectrum, and that we need to think through that. So if you live in an apartment, you live upstairs, get to know your downstairs neighbor. Downstairs neighbor, leave a note on your upstairs neighbor's door and tell them, hey, you're welcome to shelter here if we have severe weather. So these are some of the things that we might do in the field. Another thing we try to do is let people know about current legislation that has passed. So in Alabama, we have a Safer Places Act, which means it's like a Good Samaritan law. So if you're a church or another organization and there's not a shelter nearby, you can become a Safer Places shelter for our, refuge for folks during events. So we kind of talk to people about that. What does it mean? We also do a lot of messaging and graphics. So this one in particular was that message about the nocturnal tornadoes. This is a lenticular magnet that changes when you hold it. We do the sort of traditional extension publications that you guys are familiar with, and we do these on particular topics. We're getting ready to do a series on the different equipment that's used to measure severe weather. And so this is kind of what, in a nutshell, our outreach and education might look like. So we're in libraries, we use things like comic strips, we are in elementary schools. We try to go to places that we feel like we can really talk about and hone in these skills that I was just mentioning earlier. And so the whole purpose then is to increase that self-awareness, make people feel like they can do things a little bit more on their own. They feel like they know what to do. They've thought through scenarios, not just the one scenario. They thought about work. Where will I go? They've talked about home. Where will I go? What if I'm separated from my kids? What will we do? All those kinds of things. And then the last thing I wanted to just do real quickly is just show you kind of how that culminates into an event. This is the 1-year anniversary of the Selma tornado in Alabama. This is a huge event where we had about 300 or 400 people, and each table, the folks that you visit the table, you learned a particular skill. And at the end of that, after you learned all those skills, you could take your card, your stamped card, to the weather service booth, and they would give you a weather radio. So this was a really neat thing put on by the community to kind of commemorate that anniversary of those tornadoes. This is what Selma looked like after the EF2 tornado that hit them. This is actually a year after that event, so it still looked like this when we were there for the anniversary. But during this, we worked with the local EMA departments. We worked with a local art studio that hosted the event. We brought all these partners together to kind of do all these skills. The hospital taught CPR, the Red Cross taught the pillowcase project. We did a go kit. The weather forecasting office talked about where to find yourself on the map. We had local meteorologists there. The fire station did chainsaw safety outside. So it was a great way to build skills in one one big community-wide event. And this is what I want you to remember about all of this, is that, of course, this was about the people. And these two ladies right here are looking at a mural that was created out of broken glass and pieces of people's home after the tornado. And it was a very therapeutic thing, is my understanding. I was not there during the process of this, but the art studio where we held this anniversary event had brought folks together to allow them that opportunity. Remember, we talked about physical and mental health earlier, just to allow them the opportunity to grieve and to get out their frustrations, their feelings about this. And this is a picture of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is iconic in Selma, Alabama. And you can actually see, if those ladies turned around, you would actually see the bridge. And I just thought this was a really telling thing to the end of that event, that this was a way that this community healed, and they kind of came together, and how that coming together in that process helped that community be stronger in the face of new events. So this is like really my very favorite picture, is listening to these stories and the folks that created this mural. So with that, I'm going to stop. I know I've run through a lot of stuff, I've covered a lot of different things, and I'll be happy to see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Tracie. Thank you so much for sharing. It's great information. We do have one question. Claire asked, where can I access your extension publications?
Yes, so Claire, we have put most of them on our website. Let me grab that, and I'll stick it in the chat box for you. And then we have a few new ones that we're working on, and I can send you the PDFs if you would just shoot me an email to, is my screen, I think my screen's still being shared. If you could just shoot me an email, I can send you the ones that we currently have it. We just have to get them approved by the National Sea Grant Office, and then they're ready to go out.
Thanks, Tracie. And Claire says thank you. Thank you. Other questions? Tracie, I did have a question. Have y'all looked at using some of these for recovery, trying to get recovery information out to folks as well. I know it's hard, especially um, after things happen, but I didn't know if y'all had looked at that. That's definitely something we struggle with here in Florida. So I didn't know if that was something that y'all have also noticed also.
I will say, I feel like we're not as great about doing that as we are about the preparedness piece of it. I think that because the Severe Storms Lab has wanted to focus a lot of attention on the immediate aftermath and like how people are receiving watches and warnings and that kind of stuff, we tend to be going in, and we probably could be more opportunistic during that time period, right? We probably could take some of these resources, but I don't know what it is, but somehow that's always is the last thing I think of, right? I mean, I'm usually there, and to be honest with you, like sitting down and listening to these stories is so sobering. It takes like its own impact upon the person that is there, because you want to be that good peer listener. And so I think I sometimes get caught up in those moments, to be perfectly honest, and I don't always think about, okay, well, what could we be doing in the aftermath to help with recovery? So we have, like, in the Rolling Fork instance and in the Selma instance, we're working with the EMA departments to come back and do trainings, so that then we're not like trying to do it right at the time that they're trying to recover, but that there is some continuity, and that they're seeing our faces again, and that we're able to kind of help through that. So maybe we'll get better at that as we move forward, but I will say we're not that great at that right now. I don't feel like.
Thank you. I mean, like I say every time, every event is an experience and an education, a way to learn, definitely. So, thank you, Glenda, for sharing with me that the chat has been disabled. I think I just am able to share that with everyone. So, Tracie, you may want to have to just copy and paste that link again. Let's see if everybody can get it this time.
Okay.
Um,
I only way I need to do it was to respond to Claire's comment, so I don't know if that worked. Sorry.
oh yeah, Glenda's able to get the chat now. So,
Um, and there may be
and
some
let
that
me
we
see.
don't have on there, and then I can that's just like our main page, but then I'm happy to share. We also have some really cool webinars that we've been doing, and we're trying to put the recordings up there. So if there's anything that maybe I shared today that wasn't on there, please just let me know. I'll be happy to send them to you guys as
Thank
PDFs.
you, Tracie. And I just shared with everyone the one you shared too. So hopefully everyone's able to get that. And if not, y'all let me know. Lisa had asked a question, and then Lisa, I see your hands raised too. So just a second. Lisa said she's very impressed by all your programming, looking to develop some similar kinds of preparedness programming here in New Hampshire, primarily focused around flooding, and appreciate the tangible skill building examples.
Thank you for that, Lisa. You
Thank
know,
you.
I think that one of the things that when I'm working with one of the social scientists at NSSL right now, and one of the things that he has published a lot of research on is how if people don't have a high self-efficacy, they're a lot less likely to take action. And so the way to build that self-efficacy is to give them these very tangible things that they can do. And so we kind of just went back to the basics on that. And I've even had I've had people telling me they want to add things. So like we're going to add additional information on grinder pumps and what to do with grinder pumps immediately after disasters. So a lot of this is things that we teach people how to turn off their water and their gas, and like what tools they need to do that. I mean, we don't suggest that they do it when it's not a disaster or anything, but like people have saved lives by doing that. One of the gentlemen I interviewed at Rolling Fork, he lived in a mobile manufactured home. His whole home was gone. And as soon as he came out from the rubble, he heard the gas in his, like in the different neighbor's yard. And he went and got his wrench and went and turned off he probably saved a lot of people's lives that way. So I appreciate that comment, because I do think that folks have responded really well to these tangible skills that I think we sometimes take for granted.
Thank you, Tracie. Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, you've had your hand patiently raised, so please go right ahead. Oh, I'm not sure. Are you able to speak, Lissa? Let's see. Oh, let's see. Okay, try now, Lissa.
There you go. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Uh-huh. We
Yay,
can.
great. I've just really been enjoying your presentation, Tracie. I'm sorry you've had to learn all this through so many disasters, but it's great for me to hear this. I'm in northern Wisconsin. We're now starting to get tornadoes way up north where it never ever happened, but really we're dealing with a lot of flooding and believe it or not, but heavy snows, like snowstorms with 14 to 20 inches at a time. So I'm trying to bring my counties into this sort of learning experience about how to be prepared. It's a big load for me as one county extension educator. So I'm wondering what other partners you work with. I noticed in that beautiful idea to have an annual celebration of a catastrophe, you brought together some great partners related to health and the fire departments. But how about like emergency managers? Do you have that in your state, or county emergency managers to bring in and help?
We do, and oftentimes they are super helpful. So the Selma event that I showed pictures of, the weather forecasting office in Birmingham, which covers that area, helped. Like we worked with a whole variety of offices and the Dallas County Emergency Management Office at that time. They did come and they had a table and put up a booth. And then in Sharkey County, that was the whole commemoration event was really planned by the Emergency Management Office. So yes, I find that they are very, very proactive in that. And I will tell you this, the Selma event was much different than the Rolling Fork event. And I mean that in that some community, like the Rolling Fork community was kind of not sure that they wanted to, that they were ready to have an anniversary event. They felt like there was still a somberness to this. There were so many lives that were lost. And so they kind of ended up they recognized all of the emergency managers from across the state and other states that had come in at a big like luncheon. And then they actually had a large church service on a different day and then kind of a community activity day. So they kind of had this 3-day event that sort of went through that, what I consider to be kind of that range of emotions, right? The thankful that people came and helped us and thanking them and just feeling fortunate to be there. And the, let's come together as a community and do some things to kind of help us all to feel, that camaraderie again. And then they went through that sort of mourning process of the people in their community they lost. So theirs was a much different event than the Selma event. And I think that, of course, is just going to depend on your community. So, and yes, emergency management was involved in different ways, however they wanted to be involved, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate that annual sort of recuperation part of the whole process. I've spoken with people who are seniors and were stuck in their home. There wasn't a single road that was passable in their county, and little widowed old ladies were alone and their cell phones were dying. And they were talking about post-traumatic stress. And every time they heard thunder a year later, they were really afraid. So I really appreciate that recognition of the mental trauma that people go through, in addition to just the rebuilding and the cleanup.
Great. Thank you, Lissa. Sorry, it took us a while to figure out how to get you
Okay.
live and in person. So
Sorry.
we are about a minute over, so I'll go ahead and conclude for today. And thank you all so much for being with us today. Tracie, thank you so much for sharing your webinar with us today. This has been great information, and we really appreciate your time and your efforts and sharing some of the best management practices with us. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Angie.
Thanks, Tracie.